you know, that makes him pleased with that devotee. He's in the heart of every living being. It's not that he's only in the heart of the Brahmanas, or he's only in the heart of the Kshatriyas. He's in the heart of the Sudras as well. He's in the heart of the Chandalas, you know, and dog eaters, whatever they may be. Krishna's everywhere. So the relationship that we have with Krishna, you know, that has to be developed, and we need help to do that. And we come to a temple and get connected. From Krishna's point of view, all devotees are doing valuable work if it's sincerely done. So we shouldn't get too puffed up and think that now, you know, I'm more experienced, I've got a bit of expertise in this field or that field, that makes me better than others. Nobody's better than anybody else in that sense. And therefore, everything is important. What's important to, you know, the newest devotee in the temple is important to the manager. Yeah, just like a small child. Something may be very important to a small child, to an adult it may be trivial. Yeah? But the way that you deal with it is that, yes, that you've done nicely. This is important, we shall deal with that. And you help them to cope with it, and they learn a lesson from that. So in the same way with all the devotees, whatever they're going through, it's important to them. Yeah? And therefore, as a manager of that devotee, it has to be important to the manager as well. Everything is important. It's a very important principle, importance. But as Prabhupada said, that depends on your management capacity as well. So the managers, they're looking after the lives of others, but they have to look after their own lives as well. So again, that principle of not becoming overburdened. Okay, so that's some introductory overview. Just to reiterate, do all things at once, in a nice manner, whatever's practical. Keep up your own spiritual standards. Don't change. And everybody should be a servant. Everything is important, and it's also depending on your own individual capacity. So you've got about 8 principles of management there that you could expand. So now we'll have a look at a few aspects of management. I listed down about 9 different characteristics of a manager, or, you know, items of management. Clear goals, and these are not necessarily in, you know, any particular order. It's not like I'm saying this must come first and then that and then that. I'm just, off the top of my head, I thought about some things and wrote them down. So I've got clear goals, enthusiasm, patience, austerity, delegation, financial responsibility, flexibility, caring for devotees, and anger and chastisement. And there's probably a lot more aspects that you could add to that. Another one would be trust. So there's different aspects, and you know, this is arbitrary on my part, just listing them down. But we can have a look at a few of these things. But I put clear goals as being the first item if you want to be a good manager. If you don't know where you're going, because in the Nectar of Instruction, we have, you know, the list of things which will enhance your devotional service. Utsahan, Nischaya, Daryat, Tata, Kama, Pravartana. There's these different aspects. And enthusiasm is the first one, because if you don't have any enthusiasm for doing something, then you'll not do it successfully, and you'll not get the benefit from doing it either. So enthusiasm is the #1 item that Rupa Goswami defines. I put that afterwards. I put clear goals first, because if you're enthusiastic but you don't know what you're trying to be enthusiastic about, or if you're enthusiastic about the wrong thing, then you're going to cause a lot of problems for yourself and for others. So you've got to have at least a clear, you know, understanding of what you're about, what you're trying to achieve. Then you channel your enthusiasm into that goal, and then you may become successful. So as far as Srila Prabhupada goes, his clear goal is stated in the 3rd canto, 22nd chapter. This is from the purport to text 19. The text is about Kardama Muni and having Kapila as his son. So Prabhupada says in the purport, that in the same order as Kardama Muni, about 100 years ago, Thakur Bhaktivinoda also wanted to beget a child who could preach Krishna, the philosophy and teachings of Lord Chaitanya to the fullest extent. By his prayers to the Lord, he had as his child Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, who at the present moment is preaching the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya throughout the world, the entire world, through his bona fide disciples. Because there was only one bona fide disciple that was actually doing that was Prabhupada. But it's an important statement. He names his spiritual master as being a special personality that was sent to do this preaching work. And then he says, who at the present moment is preaching around the entire world. This purport was probably written in about 72 or 73. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had left the planet 30 odd years before that. But Prabhupada, for him, that was a clear statement of his agenda, his goal. Simply to do whatever his spiritual master asked him to do, that's all. Yeah. Whatever programs his spiritual master had introduced, that was what Prabhupada was introducing. Whatever structure, managerially, his spiritual master had advised, Prabhupada implemented that. And he just saw himself as an instrument that his spiritual master was working through to achieve this goal of spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. Because it was a very well-known goal. We talked about this the other day. It's not that Srila Prabhupada was the only one that got the instruction to preach in the West. Yeah. There was already the attempt in the 1930s. And there were one or two others. What's his name? That German that took initiation? Vamananda? Huh?
Sadananda?
No, Sadananda came in Bhaktisiddhanta's time.
Yeah.
But there was another one that came afterwards. Idlets.
About the idlets?
Idlets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, there were one or two other people, you know, outside of India that were devotees of some kind or another. But again, they also couldn't do anything. So the idea of preaching around the world, of course, started with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati expanded that. He had a real intention himself to move to the West. If they could implant something in London, that would be a staging point to go to America and other places. And he was personally going to do that. I think that was stated in a magazine. So somehow or another it didn't happen. But then along comes Srila Prabhupada. Yeah, he had the same instruction, although the instruction to preach around the world given to Srila Prabhupada was particular for him, but it wasn't exclusive to him. The instruction to preach around the world was given to all the devotees of the Gaudiya Math, not just Srila Prabhupada. But Prabhupada was the one who actually effected it. And why? Because he kept a very clear vision of what his spiritual master wanted and had attained, and just implemented the same thing. Nothing new, no concoctions, no artificial naming of acharyas and all these other things. Rather, just simply let me be an instrument for my spiritual master. And if you read the prayers that Prabhupada wrote when he arrived in America, then it expresses that very, very nicely. That Prabhupada says, I'm just a puppet, make me dance, make me dance, make me dance. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati then was the one who was preaching through his bona fide disciple. I'll alter that. Prabhupada says disciples. I'd rather say disciple. Yeah, singular rather than plural. Prabhupada was being very generous there. But the point is that his goal in life was to please his spiritual master, nothing else. Everything else came as a result of that, you know, having that one clear goal. In December of '76, Prabhupada told me, I never went to the West to become successful. He said, I went there because my spiritual master ordered me to do so. So I had that my duty. He said, because I had this utsaham, this enthusiasm. He said, therefore I was able to leave Vrindavan. Otherwise, without that, then I would have remained there. So in that way then, having a clear goal for a devotee means trying to fulfill the desire of your spiritual master. You don't concoct your own goals. You take what the acharyas have given, and then you try to express that in the best way that you can. So another aspect then of, or a mention of his spiritual master's vision and trying to fulfill that. This is in a letter to Jayapataka Maharaj in June of 1976. At that time, Jayapataka was working on this land acquisition deal. Earlier in the year, Prabhupada had met this man, Mr. Chowdhury. It turned out that he was one of the bigwigs in the land department of the West Bengal government. And he came out to Mayapur, he liked the project, and Prabhupada asked him to assist us in acquiring 300 acres of land. At that time we probably had 20 or 30 acres. You know, Prabhupada had a plan for a transcendental city, and so he asked this man, you give us some help. If the government can acquire the land for us, that will be the best thing. So government acquirement means they approve a project. That project may require more land than they're legally allowed to own. Because in India you have the Land Ceiling Act, and no individual or entity is allowed to own more than 24 acres. So Prabhupada wanted at least 300 acres, and the one way to do that, to get around that law, is you get the government to approve it. You know, that this is a necessary project. Then they come in, they designate the land, they force the farmers to sell, if it's farming land, they force them to sell at a fixed rate. That stops any inflation or, you know, what do you call it? When somebody,
Speculation. Speculation.
Speculation, thank you. Yes, it stops land speculation and keeps everything affordable. So Jayapataka Maharaj was given, you know, the duty to try to push through that land acquisition. So he wrote a report to Prabhupada in June, and Prabhupada replies, do your best and simply depend on Krishna. We are not acquiring the land for sense gratification, it is for Krishna's glory. Nimitta matram bhava savyas chin. Just like Arjuna was asked to fight by Krishna, so it was Prabhupada's dream to make Mayapur a transcendental city. Same thing. Yeah. Prabhupada, so it was his spiritual master that was preaching around the world, and the development of Mayapur was his spiritual master's dream. And therefore he was just trying to do his little bit to fulfill that dream. So in that way then Prabhupada didn't have to make things up. Yeah? He was just a humble messenger, as he said. Of course, from our point of view, Prabhupada was dynamic, he was adjustable and flexible to all situations. He was a genius as far as, you know, managing and preaching and so many other things. But Prabhupada, from his point of view, was just a humble servant, that's all. His spiritual master wanted a transcendental city. All right, let's do it. Let's do what we can. And of course, that's going on a scale, you know, unimaginable. At least to the other devotees. Prabhupada did give his god brothers credit where it was due. Some of them had built temples in Mayapur. He felt that was a very good thing. I remember on a morning walk in '76, we were looking over the west side, anyway, the side nearest to Bhaktisiddhanta Road. Next door to us, there was a small plot of land. One of Prabhupada's godbrothers was building a small temple. Or maybe it was '77. Anyway, we were looking over and watching the construction, and one of our devotees made some sarcastic comment, you know, to the effect that this is insignificant, it's nothing, you know, it's like critical. And the godbrother Prabhupada said no, he said he's doing his best to please his spiritual master. So he gave him that credit. So on one side, you know, anything that was done was good. But for Prabhupada, he wanted to do the biggest thing possible, the best thing possible. And therefore he came up with this idea, you know, the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. Initially that was going to be 100 feet high. You know, by 1976 we were talking about 450 feet high. Now I think we've settled on the current building, which is going to be about 360 feet high. So it's a big affair, yeah. And even some of the Gaudiya members are now openly saying this is going to be the Adbhut Mandir. I don't know about whether it is or it isn't. But, you know, it was Prabhupada's effort, it was Prabhupada's desire. And therefore we also have to put so much emphasis on building Mayapur. There's many other reasons why Mayapur is important, of course, as the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati describes it that Mayapur is the place where the transcendental world manifests in the material world. What he calls the Sweta-dweep. Yeah, the manifestation of Sweta-dweep in this material world. So it's extremely important. And you can see from that previous letter, you know, printing books and building Mayapur. That was one of Prabhupada's earliest goals, to develop Mayapur project. So anyway, all of that was Prabhupada's dream, his Prabhupada. And therefore, he made that his own. That was his goal in life, was to please his spiritual master. So again, another example. This was a letter to Madhavvisa, November 1970. So August, September, October. So they've been in India about 3 months. Prabhupada had gone there in late August. They arrived in Calcutta on the 28th. He had 4 sannyasis with him, new sannyasis. Madhavvisa was one of them. Devananda, I forget who the others were. And immediately there was a big thing in the newspapers. You know, everybody suddenly sat up and took note that this, you know, Bengali sadhu had gone to the West and now he's come back. He's converted in the lectures into Vaishnavas. So it was sensational. And Prabhupada immediately wanted to capitalize, you know, on the publicity. And one of the first things he wanted to do was get a property in Mayapur, and he'd been trying for that already for several years, and also a property in Calcutta, because of course that was his hometown, but it was the gateway to Mayapur in many respects as well. And so he told his sannyasis now, you know, what they had to do in order to get these centers. Now, of course, taking sannyas, I mentioned yesterday, for Prabhupada, if somebody was given sannyas, that means they're out of management. They're just meant for preaching. And in fact, I think in '72, when Tamal Krishna Maharaj took sannyas, then Prabhupada called him into his room afterwards and he asked him, now what are you going to do? What are your plans? And Tamal had been the GBC, you know, for India at that point. And he was, you know, the main organizer manager. And so it was understood now he was no longer the GBC because he took sannyas. No, you know, messing around now with money and properties and all these things. So Tamal had been thinking about what he was going to do as a sannyasi, and it probably reflects the mood that all the devotees had, the impression they had of what it means to be a sannyasi. He said, I'm going to walk from one village to the next, chant Hare Krishna and preach. And I'm going to walk all around India preaching. That was his idea. So Prabhupada didn't think that that was very practical. And in fact what he did was that he removed the stricture that sannyasis cannot be GBCs, because he realized some of his best managers were also going to take sannyas and he would lose them. So he changed that, you know, that standard after Tamal took sannyas. But at least anyway, in 1970, there was, you know, this 6 devotees that were given sannyas in July and August, and then Prabhupada took them with him to India. So in India, of course, that's the land of sannyasis. You know, everybody knows what a sannyasi is, more or less. So, but still, they wanted to develop a temple there. So Prabhupada writes to Madhavvisa, I've given you the hint how to purchase the property by making life members. Yourself, Achyutananda Swami, Jayapataka Swami, and Hanuman can divide up and go and see important men. There are so many big men in Calcutta who can become our life members if you convince them. This requires unwavering strength and enthusiasm to fulfill the desires of the spiritual master. Same principle at work. This is the clear goal, to fulfill the desire of the spiritual master. Regardless of what you think you are now, you're running around with a danda, but I'm telling you to go out and collect money. That was our Prabhupada, you know, the first engagement that he gave to his new sannyasis, go out and collect some money. It seems to be contradictory. But, as he said, the real principle is that you have to have unwavering strength and enthusiasm to fulfill the desires of the spiritual master. When my Guru Maharaj ordered me to spread this movement in the English-speaking countries, I did not know how I could do it, but I never lost faith, nor did I ever forget this order. So that was Prabhupada's practical experience. The impossible becomes possible. You know, what's that verse? A lame man can climb a mountain, and a dumb man can speak. Yeah, this is the practical example. Prabhupada had no resources, he had no help, he had no money, but he had this really, you know, fixed determination and enthusiasm to please his spiritual master. And there's some examples of that. Just like in the 1950s, because after the breakup of the Gaudiya Math, now Prabhupada was going to preach. That was a difficulty. He'd been given this instruction 2 weeks before the disappearance of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to do preaching in English, in the English language. But none of his godbrothers were doing that. So Prabhupada had to figure out how to execute that order. So in 1944 he created Back to Godhead magazine. So that was his tool or his instrument that he was going to use to fulfill his spiritual master's instruction. But from a practical point of view, it didn't seem very realistic. You know, an English language newspaper about spiritual topics. Who was going to be interested in that in India? Of course, Indians know English as a second language, at least educated ones do. But it's not like the primary, you know, means of communication. But Prabhupada had been given the instructions, so, you know, although he created the Back to Godhead, realistically, what was there any hope that it would be effective? But he stuck with it, and throughout the 50s up until 1960, he was still trying to publish his Back to Godhead. And he had big plans for it. He was very enthusiastic. There's a letter in 1956 where Prabhupada writes to his subscribers. And that year he managed to get 11 issues of Back to Godhead out, so he must have been working really hard. And it was supposed to come out every fortnight. So Prabhupada was doing the whole thing himself. He wrote all the articles, he edited them, he went to the printer and bought the paper, he supervised the layout and you know, setting up the letterpress. And once it was printed, because he had to get the money to pay for it, and once it was printed, then he was the one that was going out to sell it as well. So everything in Back to Godhead was Srila Prabhupada. So you'd think after now, 1956 means 12 years, he'd been trying to preach through Back to Godhead. He was getting a few copies out, not much, hardly anything. But still, in that particular year, he sends this letter out to, you know, his subscribers, and he tells them, now you can help me to spread Back to Godhead all over the world. And he, in the following manner, and then he lists about 52 or 53 different countries, all alphabetically, except for the last few which he added in. And he starts off that, you know, you give me the money, I'll print and I'll send copies of Back to Godhead to the leading citizens of all these different countries. He doesn't know anybody, right? He has no idea who's in Afghanistan. That was the first one on the list, right? 500 copies. And in this way he starts going through all the, you know, different countries of the world alphabetically, and assigning them, you know, a certain number of Back to Godheads. 500 in Belgium, you know, 10,000 for America, you know, 10,000 for England, like that. So he lists the whole thing. The whole list comes to about 75,000 copies of each issue, which he's just going to send out across the seas to who he doesn't know. I don't know what he had in mind for, you know, figuring out who was going to receive them. Most of the countries that he was going to send them to were also not English-speaking countries, right? They were, you know, every other language. But Prabhupada was not, you know, calculating that way. He was calculating, my spiritual master ordered me to preach in the English language. I'm going to do it, whatever the result. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So BTG was his first attempt. Then, of course, he started books, Easy Journey to Other Planets. And then he got seriously into the Bhagavatam, and we've already discussed about, again, the material impossibility of such a task. Translating, you know, an 18,000 verse work from Sanskrit into English and making a commentary, not just translating. If he'd have just been doing the translation itself, it would have been a big enough job. But then to add extensive commentaries, you know, to almost all of the verses, you know, how practical is that? And where is the audience for the Bhagavatam? If there was no audience for Back to Godhead, then there'd be even less of an audience for the Bhagavatam. You know, it's such an obscure work according to, you know, at least even in India, I mean, people know the Bhagavad Purana, but, you know, it's kind of obscure. But Prabhupada was not calculating like that. His business was to please his spiritual master. When he was in Jhansi, he started up the League of Devotees. That was his first attempt at making an organized approach to his preaching. So I guess that was about 1952 or something like that. With the League of Devotees, he hired some property, and he managed to attract a few medical students to him. So they were living with him, actually. But out of those, only one of them was even a little bit serious. That was Prabhu Misra. And he became, Prabhupada said, I initiated him. He was a little bit serious at one point, Haridas. But all the rest of them, he said, they were not serious, so I didn't initiate them. So Prabhu Misra, Haridas, he was interviewed for this Memories series by Siddhanta Prabhu from ITV. And he describes how, when they were living in Jhansi, Prabhupada would always want to go out and padayatra. So he could never persuade the other students to come with him, but Prabhupada sometimes went out with him. So just the two of them. Or sometimes he said Prabhupada, you know, he wasn't available. Prabhupada would go out on his own, and he would do padayatra from Jhansi to, you know, the different local villages. He'd walk all the way there chanting. He'd sit down and chant some more, and then he'd walk all the way back chanting. That was his preaching. He had different plans. He was going to make up a team of brahmacharis, get 2 trucks, load them up with equipment, and then drive from one village to another all over India and preach Krishna consciousness. He had so many plans, but nobody was helping. He approached several rich men. You've got several sons. Give one son. I'll train him up as a first-class Vaishnava and Brahmana. No, that's no need for that. Now, technology is the way to go. So nobody would cooperate. He had no help from his godbrothers. Just him, that was it. And this one medical student occasionally. But Prabhupada never lost his enthusiasm because he was on a mission given to him by his spiritual master. So in this way, I mean, there's endless examples, but we can see the core, the root of Prabhupada's success in creating and managing ISKCON was simply his dedication to his spiritual master's instructions, that's all. You know, whatever he was told, just do that. No, you know, concoctions or anything new. And of course, he was getting a lot of inner inspiration as well. Prabhupada also mentions that one night he woke up in the middle of the night. Maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. He had somebody playing the mridanga, banging away. And so he went in the next room, and Prabhupada was there, and he was dancing around the room with the mridanga, playing the mridanga very enthusiastically and chanting. And he had a big garland of kadamba flowers around his neck. And Prabhupada knew that you can't get kadamba flowers in Jhansi, they don't grow there. So he couldn't figure out, where does this garland come from, and why is, you know, I don't know what he called Prabhupada, maybe Swami Maharaj, but why is he dancing around? And Prabhupada told him that